You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Merry Christmas, Perth. Perth Property Show is still running as always. We don't stop. Your host, Trent Fleskins, as always on the mic. And we've got Brendon Ptolomey, who also doesn't stop, doesn't sleep.
Doesn't stop talking. Hi, Trent. How you going?
Good, mate.
As long as it's property, I'm here to talk.
Normally in a quiet time over this time, aren't we? In terms of Christmas valuations, surely the volume's got to be a little bit lower.
Yeah, volumes drop off in between Christmas and New Year by nearly half, or sometimes a little bit more than that. What we do find, though, in residential valuations is that they often really smash into Christmas. So we'll be there the last few days before Christmas, still getting requests in, people still wanting their house valued, and that essentially is the pent-up demand that people have missed applications or haven't got their ducks all lined up in a row and they're going for that panic mode. So we often have our Christmas party on a Saturday so that we can keep working every single day of the week on the way up to Christmas.
Jeez.
And keep
Outside
our staff motivated.
Hours, eh?
Yeah.
It's poor planning in my eyes. I mean, obviously you were buying every day of the year, but it's not an easy time from the broking side, I can say at the very least, to get finance through a bank.
Yeah.
They're at skeleton staff. You guys are obviously losing a few people.
Yep.
Time
the
frames.
efficiencies go absolutely out the window. Yeah. And you'll end up with that processing person within the bank who isn't used to knowing that they need to ask for that one extra document that everyone's been forgetting this month or whatever the case might be that the bank's focusing on. And as you say, you lose another day or two or three while you sort that information out.
I hope everyone has had an extra long finance period over this time to give Brendon his time to do his job.
It's okay. We'll be there. We are motivated to be there. We are a well-oiled machine, mate. We get a large number of requests through the door every single day, and we're a absolute unit in terms of gaining access to the property and getting our report back to our customer.
Well, does that apply in the regional space, Brendan? We're talking regional market update today.
Yeah, really interestingly.
Surely you've got one person per town. What if they go on holiday?
Yeah, well, logistically, this becomes great fun for us. So we've got people all over Western Australia. We've got people in Esperance, Bunbury, Busselton, Karratha, Geraldton, Kalgoorlie today. So, yeah, we have people all over the place, and covering for them when they go on holidays is a real challenge. Obviously, the number of valuers in the southwest goes up over Christmas, New Year when everyone's on holidays. But, yeah, facetiously, we've got a valuer in Karratha. Not sure whether she's on leave over Christmas, New Year. I better check in with her. Hopefully, what we get there is actually just less volume, and we can handle that through that period. Yeah.
Is it a case where sometimes you just put your hand up and say, look, we haven't got someone in Busselton this week, competitors, you guys have it?
So yeah, there is
do you share it around sometimes just to have the best outcome for the client?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we would like to think, we've got 25 residential valuers in the Perth metro area alone, so we hope that we've got enough capacity there to handle the volume, and we can obviously fly people in and out and drive people in and out of those towns if we need to over the Christmas, New Year period. But we get a large volume of our valuation requests from a system called Valix, which is owned by CoreLogic or RP Data, people that know those brand names. And we do have an opportunity in there to say, look, we can't service this for another 5 days, or give them that honest answer as to when we can get to the job, and that will give them the opportunity to cancel the request and then reallocate it in the pool to our competitors and see if they're in the area.
That's good. All right, perfect. So regional space, we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I guess, about the Perth space, and we had a jolly chat about what's been going on for the last 12 months and what the future looks like. Isn't it interesting that the regional space has been a little bit different?
Yeah, it has been really interesting. The highlight
more interesting than the Perth space.
Yeah, well, the highlight of that interest has probably been Karratha, because it's highlighted what happens in the microcosm of a small town market, and when it changes. We would have been talking about a year ago the opportunity for Karratha to change, and we had just seen the start of it going up, basically, and we had seen what we were calling the bottom, and we could see a little bit of value movement. And then what happened over the whole of 2019 is just a bit of a stampede kicked in. So
1 out of 2 ain't bad, eh?
Yeah.
We've got the regionals, right?
Yeah, and Port Hedland's not exactly the same. It's still struggling for a little bit of traction, but values have bottomed out and have gone up during this year.
Problem is, you're comparing to Karratha.
Yep.
If you compare Hedland to Perth, you go, oh, yeah, Hedland's done all right.
Yeah, and depending on when you buy in some of those towns, I mean, we always talk about Newman. If you had bought in Newman 2 years ago, you definitely picked the bottom of the market, and you will have made money on that capital price.
And they
or
were
capital
super
purchase.
cheap.
Yeah. I remember
100
doing
grand.
I did a val on a really ordinary place that we were down around, I think it was a
50
mortgagee in
wasn't it?
possession. I think it was 50 odd K.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is crazy, isn't it? And it was a fibro shack, but
all it takes is a
still.
couple of long weekends driving your hire van up to Newman with all your gear, doing some renos on it, rent it out for a year, hope it doesn't get wrecked, and then a year later, you double your money probably.
Yeah, potentially. You just got to have that skill set to actually do the reno trend.
Yeah, well, that doesn't exist with me. I don't know about you, mate, but I'm thinking of going to wood school just to say I've got something. Let's start from bottom to top. Do we have any data on sort of Esperance, Albany, all those areas, even if it's just more anecdotal?
Yeah, very anecdotal. And just Esperance, that market is in one of those flat periods, lacking demand, not a huge amount of supply there as well. The interesting thing about Esperance has been that the supply that has been bought by local farmers that have had more than a couple of good years down there.
Some really good years recently.
Yeah, and they need to find somewhere to put that capital, so they might buy the
next plot.
Yeah, the shed in town, a little bit of industrial property in town, or a residential property in town, maybe the holiday house on the coast, those kinds of things. So that's what's driven that market pretty much over the last couple of years. The downside of that, of course, is that they'll also look beyond their closest town to make an investment. So they go down to Albany, or they go into the city, and they might have so much capital from that region that they'll buy an office building as opposed to a house. Who knows?
Yeah, why not? I'm most interested in the southwest about Bunbury and how the lithium space is affecting / going to affect that area into the future. The interesting thing about that is, though, it is also affected by a smaller, more immature house and land market as well. So there's still supply there. It's not like you're in a town where there's not really any supply.
Yeah. So a bit of a two-paced market down there that's a little bit hard to analyse from afar, but essentially we have the Perth suburban type market going on that you're alluding to. So your Eaton, Australind type areas of new house and land packages, some really good quality stock through there, because people have built their dream home. A lot of fly in, fly out workers have located themselves down there. So some of that stock's been okay, but what we have had is an oversupply of some of that stock. So to the north of Bunbury, to the south in Dalyellup as well, oversupply, a little bit too much of the same product on the market, and a correction in those values. Now what we're seeing is just a little bit of that negative sentiment coming out and that positive sentiment coming in terms of what's happening with that local economy. So good houses selling, same as Perth, good suburbs selling, and value increases in some of those good suburbs, and then those newer suburbs and oversupplied suburbs just languishing a little bit in terms of trying to get some traction.
Do you think that in the midterm we're going to see a structural change in values in Bunbury given that new source of economy coming out of the lithium space? Or do you think it's serviced enough, there's enough capacity, it's far away enough, it's got enough other towns around to soak up that demand?
Yeah, you'd have to think that there's going to be a flow through, because they're doubling the size of Greenbushes, right? It's going to be the biggest lithium mine in the world. We get a little bit too far downstream and out of my pay grade in terms of analysing how that works in terms of the world economy and prices for lithium. We're seeing nickel go through the roof at the minute as well. Those other metals have had their run. We all need new phones every year, apparently. And more importantly, we all need bigger batteries for lots of the things we're buying. So you'd expect it, as the analysts are saying, to be a long-term resource. With Bunbury being the focus of the port there to export that product, you'd have to think that jobs just keep getting added on.
Port
through
upgrades,
all
this. I guess look at the East Coast, right? You look at places like Newcastle, all the Sunshine Coast, Central Coast, all these satellite towns along the coast there, especially places like Newcastle and the Central Coast, they've got real foundational populations that aren't just a couple of 100,000. They're moving into the 500,000, and they're nearly their own city.
Yep.
I'm waiting for when Bunbury, which is the next cab off the rank in the western side of Australia, becomes something like that.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, obviously needs
stops being seen as a country town.
Yeah, and it needs that local economy to grow. So what we just talked about is definitely the push to go in that direction, and all the services that pop up around that. All of those things that we just talked about needs infrastructure to be constructed, and then it needs to be maintained. Probably the benefit they've got is that they need somewhere to live, obviously, those workers, and it's not a bad place to live.
It's an
a
established
really
area.
nice place.
Yeah.
Yep. The only other factor that we saw there is a bit of lifestyle buying, so closer to Busselton, probably bottom end of Bunbury, all through 2019. We actually had some really good purchase activity, some really good soaking up of that supply, and actually some value growth in some of the lifestyle type properties. And so what we think was happening there was...
You flipped and flopped with Southwest, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we saw is some people selling out of Perth and going to... So it might be a FIFO out of Perth and going, okay, the value of my house here is going south. Actually, this isn't where our long-term plan was. That's not the school the kids were always going to go to. We were planning on moving down there at some point in time. So before this goes much further south in Perth, let's sell this up and go and put that equity into this down south property and set up where we're going to be.
I just remember a year ago, I'm pretty sure it was a year ago, Heron Todd White had the Southwest on the rising market, right?
Yeah.
And then you pulled that back pretty quickly.
Had to come back again. Yeah.
Yep.
And that was just early indications. I think we went too early. I think maybe we were just being really honest that there was some really good activity at the start of 2019 where we thought, yep, here we go. This is on the move. And then obviously that activity dropped away into the middle of the year. Yep.
Has Kalgoorlie got any updates at all?
Mortgagee and possessions are selling.
That is not a good update. That cannot be the headline. Mortgagee and possessions are selling.
We are doing less of them, so there's a lesser volume in there. Look, nickel mine down the road in Kambalda coming back to life. Gold price is going really well and continue to go in the right direction.
Strong.
So, look, the town will be fine. It's just that, and you know, it is just in that cycle again. So it probably has just bottomed out, really.
Is this a natural value for Kalgoorlie, though? Is this where probably it needs to be?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's probably its point of difference is to be able to be affordable while creating half-decent product
the most affordable mine in town that actually has a real purpose and a longevity.
Yep.
In all of WA.
Yeah, and if you talk to the local council, the mayor's been really forthright at the end of 2019 in some press releases saying we want to get rid of FIFO for this town. We want people to come and live here. Yeah. So one of the things that can help make that happen is obviously cheaper house prices and giving people different opportunities in terms of getting on the property ladder.
Geraldton?
Gero's really struggling, unfortunately. There's, I think, that local economy factor that we just talked about in Bunbury, and it is the opposite of that excitement. Obviously, 2019 saw some headlines about Okajee and the Chinese coming in there to buy that project up. That's the best opportunity the town's got to reverse its local economy factors.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are some socio-economic issues in some of those suburbs through there where we see the worst of that in terms of people losing their houses and mortgagee in possession, and
it forces transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And some of those properties are, they're at Newman values. We do some vals where it's 50 to 100 grand. For a house on the outskirts of Geraldton. There's also some of the higher end property where local developers have gotten into some trouble and bits and pieces like that. So both in commercial zone and in the residential side of things, really struggling in terms of bringing some of that supply to the market. So yeah, unfortunately not a town that's going gangbusters at the moment, a long way from doing that. But every downside creates an opportunity for a counter-cyclical investor to go and have a look at. So yeah.
To be honest, I think the counter-cyclical investor will be staying counter-cyclical until the year that Okajee Port actually gets funding.
Yeah.
And that could be a decade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okajee has always been an idea that is only feasible financially when we're in a boom.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the current ports, they just keep kicking on and they're in capacity, right?
Yep.
So Okajee is only necessary in the Midwest, in those mining towns, when those Midwest mining towns, which aren't actually that economical most of the time, can come to market and the reserves increase again, then Geraldton becomes an option of, how do we increase capacity, those sort of things, right?
Yeah. Well, and the state government policy is to use the existing port. So they're obviously not going to be pushing Okajee too hard and certainly won't be spending any money on it. Yeah.
You touched on Newman. I'm super excited about Newman. I think Newman is the underappreciated regional town of the year, just because it obviously doesn't get as many headlines. There's not as many people. But when you look at the numbers of the last boom, everyone always talks about Karratha and Headland, right? They rarely talk about Newman. A lot of people, most people haven't been to Newman. They haven't got a reason to go to Newman. But when you look at percentages, people made so much money in Newman and obviously lost just as much on the way back down.
Yep.
When you think about getting into a property that's even more financially accessible.
Yes.
If you're going to play that game, if you're going to play the high risk, high reward regional game that we all seem to now understand the ups and downs of in WA,
Yep.
Newman's the most accessible financially to getting on board with that.
Yeah, there's some product in South Headland that would be on a par with some of those capital values in terms of maybe just comparing the two and giving people some options. But I agree. Newman obviously has had its massive struggles. The locals have bought up through there as well to kind of get their lifestyle type property, those people in the area. The other thing to remember is the amount of actual project mining that's going on around the town is absolutely huge. And I know those miners don't come to town a lot, but they are increasingly, so there's more and more of them up there, and so they increasingly will be looking for somewhere down the road.
On the fringes, yeah. And it's the service companies, it's the subcontractors that have to house their staff, otherwise they can't get staff that are buying all these properties, 4x4s, 5x4s, 3x3s, or essentially just multi-unit houses where the rent yields are ridiculous.
Yeah. And if you have a look at some of those projects up there, there's nearly $10 billion being spent on iron ore projects around just to the north and west of Newman, basically.
Yeah. So I think we're just going to have another good thing to say about it the next time we talk about regionals. Newman will just be, it's just been going even better than last time.
Yeah. And the advice for everyone is just to make sure you do your homework. Maybe
super site specific, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to, I'm a valuer, I'm risk averse. I would never buy anything without looking at it. So you do need to plan to go and spend some time up there and have a look around. If you think about, in the scheme of things, how much you stand to win and lose, then it's worth spending the $800 return on a plane flight. Just make sure you get the cheap flight.
Which is $800.
Yeah. I think if you go up mid-morning and come back last thing, you can maybe get it a bit cheaper. But anyway,
every time we talk regional,
every
time we talk regional and we talk about areas that we're keen on, there's always, and I will keep saying it, there is always the caveat of don't buy anything unless you go there and touch and feel the place.
Absolutely.
And look next door, because it's real hit and miss.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
so
really,
from one street
really
to the next, you can find out whether you're in the right street or the wrong street, and the quality of housing in that street. Yeah, literally. So, and that goes for Karratha, it goes for Port Hedland, South Hedland, Newman. All of those towns are very similar. Not so much in Tom Price. But I'm not sure that many people
Tom Price is an oasis, a beautiful place.
It's an amazing place. Yeah.
I'm not sure many people that have been to Tom Price in WA. They really should. You drive in there, and you've just been driving for hours of just nothing, right?
Yeah.
Just nothing. And you drive in that main road, and it's bordered by this beautiful range of mountains. I wouldn't call mountains, but
it feels like it's
hills.
almost in a crater. Doesn't
Yeah.
it?
It's in like it's semicircle of this range, you would call it, and then it's just trees and palm trees everywhere. It's literally an oasis.
Yeah.
It's such a respite for anyone who spent hours looking at the mirage on the horizon in the Pilbara.
The red
rock.
rock.
Mirage. Yeah, exactly.
And Carriganie's just down the road, so it's not a bad spot to grab your pub lunch or dinner or whatever and stop off and before you get down to Carriganie the next morning. Yeah.
I'm sure have Tourism WA giving us a call tomorrow morning. Karratha, let's talk about the big dog.
Yeah, so really interesting 2019 in Karratha. So don't have any individual stats in terms of the uptick in terms of median house price in there. What I do have is case scenarios of what we've seen in values in there. So I'll just play out the landscape in terms of how that market's changed, because it's indicative of how a market evolves in a town like that.
Set us the scene, Brendon.
Yeah, so we started January 2019 going, okay, there's a little bit of uplift here. We've come off the bottom. There's a fair bit of supply. And in our opinion, locally within the office, we were talking about essentially a clean out still waiting to happen. So there's supply there. There's locals buying. They're moving out of rental properties and buying the choice that they want in terms of their ideal house. The locals' ideal house, or their idea of that, was the older style 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom often.
Brick.
Big patio, always brick. Big patio, big block, hopefully a shed on it and a pool. So that's the idea of a lifestyle property in Karratha. So we started seeing the eyes picked out of that. So people bought the good ones and they bought the less good ones because all the good ones
Miller's
had run
Well,
out.
Nickel.
Yep, exactly.
Established
and they're
suburbs.
always going for the larger lot, somewhere to park the extra toys, the boat, the jet skis, the extra car, all those kinds of things, and to look after the kids. The outdoor living area needs to be big because the kids are going to live out the back in the pool, those kinds of things. So saw those get picked out. And then what we saw in the middle of the year was a little bit of panic around town in terms of some information that the rental availability, as in the stock of houses available for rent, would be decreased because one of the miners was going to take those out of the marketplace. So what we saw is the existing locals that were renting essentially go to a panic buying mode. Okay, I've been thinking about buying.
I've been through this before.
Yeah, been through this before. What happens when the rental market supply is reduced? Rents get jacked up. They're already relatively strong. I think the misconception in Perth is that the rents are cheap there. If you're paying $450 a week in Karratha, you have got one of the cheapest properties in town, and you're more likely, if you want a family property, paying $600 to $650 at the moment. So
interest rates are still just as cheap in Karratha as they are in Perth.
Seem to be the same, pretty much. Yeah,
which is a big difference when you compare it to the last boom.
Yep.
When they're at 7%.
Yep.
Around the country. Now they're at 3.5% for investments.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big differential in yield. We're talking about anniversary episode, the yield differential in Perth from 4 to 3%.
Yep.
Well, this is like 8 to 3%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what obviously gets investors interested. So what we saw were the locals sitting there going, hang on, if I stay where I am and continue to rent, my rent is going to get jacked up over the next period of time because the rental supply has gone down. So how about I go and buy? And so we suddenly saw everyone in town, as well as investors, coming in to buy whatever they could. And so we saw things like the $250,000, $300,000 property that was at the base, that was the base of the market. Suddenly it's at $350,000, going to $400,000, and we saw these things get, as we saw in panic buying in Perth in the booms. Something goes to market at a price, someone offers slightly more than that marketing price. The next person walks in the door and offers slightly more, and suddenly property values are on the rise again. So consolidation of that market, rapid rise in terms of increment of value, so easily up 10%, probably 20% off the bottom, and activity. So our valuer in town just absolutely run off her feet trying to keep up with that demand in terms of people buying up property in Karratha.
I want to play a bit of a game with you on the 12-month perspective. Thinking just, we'll talk about, I'll name each place, and we're thinking an up, no change, or down.
Right, okay.
Happy to
Do I
play
get a
that
buzzer
game?
or something?
Yeah. It's a full-on caveat of this is not advice, but I'll play it with you.
Yeah.
We'll see what we think. So let's start from the bottom. Esperance.
That'll stay the same.
I think the same.
Yeah, level market.
Albany.
Value increase in good locations. Otherwise, the lesser locations will stay level.
Yeah, I think slightly. Yeah, so I'll say they're slightly up. Bunbury.
Bunbury, good locations will continue to get good activity. Poor locations will struggle for traction.
Okay, I'll go with you on that. I think same as Albany, sort of slightly up on an average, we'll see.
Yep.
Kalgoorlie,
bottom end of the market, hopefully consolidates. It's still sliding slightly. Middle of the market, it will consolidate. I'm not sure we'll actually see statistical growth in value.
Yeah, I think nothing.
Yeah.
Gero
going backwards,
down,
unfortunately.
Yep. Newman.
I think we probably have to see a little bit of growth. I think their stats will show that. The only caveat I've got on that is that there is some boarded up supply there. So
a lot. There's actually a lot of boarded up supply.
So if that's
BHP
suddenly all arrives
supply,
on the market,
though. That's BHP housing their people.
Exactly. So
I don't think
you can't see that hitting the market.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep. So I think
probably the stats when we get to the end of the year will show that it's gone up.
I reckon we'll see at least 10% up in Newman.
Yeah, okay.
That's just my thoughts.
Being a valuer, I don't want to put a number.
No, you don't have to put any numbers. I don't have to worry about that. I'm just the one putting out random numbers everywhere. But I think I'm more bullish on Newman than I am on Karratha in terms of percentages.
Yeah,
just because of the low base.
Yeah.
Headland.
So Port Hedland will recover and values will go up on that statistical analysis of the actual port or the suburb of Port Hedland.
It's a very small area, isn't it?
Yeah, but we did see a severe correction in those numbers and people still want to live there. It's still a nicer place to be than South Hedland, so there will be value growth there. Yep, South Hedland, I think we'll see statistically a rise because what we're seeing is that some properties are still going backwards in value, but other things are being cleaned out. So the bottom of the market is actually, there's a few developments and things like that have been brought to the market and sold out really quickly. So there'll be a statistical growth through the year in Port.
Now, Karratha's the last one. I've just been thinking about in real numbers what I think it's going to look like. It's currently sitting in the mid-4s as a median, I'm pretty sure, in Karratha. Now, this is going to go against what I've just said about Newman being the top at 10%. I see him being in the mid-5s. So I just don't see why they wouldn't start clipping up there. There's enough people. Everyone looking to buy in Karratha is making a lot of money.
Yep.
They've been saving a lot of money. They're quite prudent, ambitious, intelligent people in Karratha.
Yep.
And I think they've seen the wave before. They've seen where it's gone before. They understand costs of replacement value of building new homes. So there's no more supply that's going to come on until we get to replacement value in the 700s. I think these ambitious people will keep buying. And they can, and the banks will start to lend more often. So I think we'll see at least 10, to be honest, at least 10% growth in Karratha.
Yeah, so we've still got that gap between what an existing dwelling is worth and how much it costs to replace one, so to bring in new supply. So we're still dealing in a marketplace that has limited supply, and the market is smart enough to understand that up there, and they will know that having missed out already on the growth that's happened so far, that they have to just keep chasing it.
Yep.
And I think that the growth happens. So I'm told 650 is kind of anything
replacement.
The cheapest you're going to get a new house out of the ground for there, and with the land. Until we get to that level, you're almost kind of open slather of as to being undervalued.
Yeah.
Having said that, 650 still sounds really expensive.
Yeah.
But
so did $1.2 million.
Exactly. So then you get back to what's the realms of possibility.
So does $600 a week in rent. So does $1,000 a week in rent.
Yep.
And look, I'm not invested in Karratha.
Yep.
I have no interest personally in investing in that area. It's more just you see the money that's up there, you see the projects going up there, you see the consolidation of people, it's very smart, switched on people up there that have been sitting and waiting and now just getting in. Don't see why that market, given the 0% growth of supply that will happen for the next couple of years, why we wouldn't. Remember, the second the median price starts getting to 600s, it then takes a year and a bit to actually build anything for any more supply to come on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, someone should be building now.
Yeah,
it'd be a great risk to take if you're a builder and worked out a cheaper way to do things, but obviously that's not possible or feasible. Now, the other thing to remember about Karratha is that as it comes back on this cycle, in a growth cycle, it is now a different town to what it was in the last growth cycle. So all of that Pilbara City's money has been spent. Yep. The town's been rearranged. There's a new shopping centre going in down at Tambray. So look, a few of those infrastructure things start changing, and that does change the way things work and the livability of the place. And it's a much nicer place to live now than it was pre-Pilbara City's money. So there's a lot of really good infrastructure in there. So we should remember that as well.
It's the one place I've been outside of Perth where I've sat there and thought, you know what, if I had a job up here or I had an opportunity to have a job up here, I'd be happy to bring the missus up and have that lifestyle, because it's got the local footy teams, it's got the shopping centre, it's got the great medical facilities, it's got the population of people in that similar bracket looking to make something of themselves. And then with that new growth of the new shopping centre coming in, it's actually a really nice place to be. It's not languishing on the way back like I would suggest a Geraldton or a Kalgoorlie is trying to chase its tail. I think it's actually fundamentally got some growth in its demographics and just its lifestyle optionality. And obviously gets the return on the investment that the government put into it, because they saw the opportunity to build that city up. All right. Well, thank you very much, Brendon. That's perfectly on the half an hour, I reckon.
Nice work.
Thank you very much. Have a good New Year's break, and we'll talk to you soon. I want to talk apartments, off the plan stuff. We haven't had the chance to actually speak about what's going on with the stamp duty reduction. So
that's exciting.
I look forward to speaking to you in 2020.
Happy New Year.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!